Hello again, I'm Frank. I will cover making a planting plan and choosing your site. And later, Cheryl will cover consider containers and making garden beds. So tonight, we're going to take you step by step through the process of creating your personal planting plan, identifying those vegetables you want to grow, and creating a personal planting map. By the end of tonight's instruction, you'll have the knowledge and the resources to create a plan that you will use to start your own garden. Sounds like some of you guys already have gardens, so this might just be some information for you to expand your knowledge on. Again, as we move along, please write any questions you have in the chat box, and we're going to stop now and then, and Rinda will monitor that activity and answer. We'll go through answering the questions at that time. Next slide.
Oops, sorry.
Let's see here. All right, got to move up a couple.
Did I mix some up?
I was just going to say a couple things on the planting plan.
Oh, okay.
We can move to that. It's fine. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So really, before you start growing anything, you want to think about some things. You know, it sounds kind of obvious when you look at it. Grow what you want to eat, of course, but you know, you should really get some input from your family if you're able to. You know, not everybody likes the hot peppers or broccoli or cabbage or what have you. So you want to make sure you take that into account and grow those things that you're going to enjoy. Also, everyone's here in the Willamette Valley, so you know that there are a lot of things that grow here, but you need to make sure that you're picking those types of plants that you're going to have success with, or higher chances of that. And we've got a great chart that we'll get into soon that will help with finding some of that out. Next, not everyone has unlimited amount of space. No one does really, but for your garden, you've got to find out what you have available to you and make sure you use that space wisely. And you're always going to want to plant for that mature footprint of your plants. You know, how big is that plant going to be when it is mature? All right, next slide. So just like it says there, grow what you like. As a starting point, I encourage you all to make a list of 10 vegetables that you and your family enjoy. And this list is going to serve as a starting point for your plan. Next slide. All right, so once you get that list of favorite vegetables, it's time to narrow it down, okay? First, let's take a look at one of the resources in this chapter. If you have, I know I heard earlier, not everyone has their participant guide, but if you do, please turn to page 14. That's where this crop chart is, and it's a common chart, and it lists many crops that grow well in our region. We'll refer to this chart several times during this lesson, and it will be a useful resource for you throughout the garden season. If it turns out that there are things, once you develop this list, that aren't on this chart, you may consider crossing some of them off, especially if they're not going to grow well here. Sweet potatoes are a favorite of many. Unfortunately, our climate doesn't generate enough heat to really grow those well. So, do yourself a favor and try to choose some of those plants on this chart that will allow you to have a higher chance of success. Next slide. All right, so here's a zoomed in image of that same chart that we were looking at earlier. And if you take a look at the planting window, well, tell you what, let's slow down a little bit before I get into that. Let's look at the top of this chart. So if you see the title headings on the top left, it says crop, and those are all the crops below it. And you've got a W that signifies those warm season crops and a C that signifies those cool season crops. Next to that is the planting window. All right, and it's a range of months. It's not a specific date, but you may be able to narrow that down when you read the seed packet. Those seed packets, once, we're going to cover that not today in detail, but it's valuable information on the back of those packets that might help you refine Instead of just March, you can find out back off of the different frost dates and be able to have a better idea of when to plant those. You also may find a hybrid cultivar that has been, crossbred or somehow will do better in this area, and you might be able to put it in a little earlier, and that might be okay. So let's take a look real quick up here at the chart. You can look, it says now it's March, so let's take a look at what we can grow in March. There's a variety of cool crops that can be planted now. You've got those basil, beets, broccoli, carrots. Those are just a few there that were in that proper planting window. You need to make sure you take those planting window recommendations with some caution. Let's take a look at basil real quick. You can see that the basil, it's considered a warm season crop, and it says, yes, you can plant it in March. However, if you do direct seed it, transplant means you want to plant something that is not, it's already grown a little bit. It's, smaller plants already got some roots, and when you put it in the ground, it's a little more mature. So that's how you would want to plant that basil in March. If you direct seed it, you're not going to likely generate enough heat. It's that overnight temperature that will prevent that from happening. So just take that as a tip as you move along. Again, this chart's general. There's a little flex, and those seeds will help you. So let's say you decide to grow some basil, and when you initially get that basil, it's probably going to be about 2 inch by 2 inch, a real small pot. And by the time it's grown, you need to have at least a 12 inch by 12 inch footprint. That's how big you can expect that plant to grow. And there's some cultivars out there, basil, it's probably the minimum 12 inch by 12 inch, because there are some cultivars that will grow a lot bigger than that. If you take a look at this, you've got a great example of the footprint required for a mature tomato plant. A lot of us love growing tomatoes. I sure do. And this chart here is listed, the example is on page 11 of your participant guide. Traditionally, when you receive that tomato plant at the beginning of the season, just like that basil was really small, it might be a 5 inch by 5 inch start. At the end of the season, when it's full of fruit, it could be up to a full yard square, and that's trellised. Takes up a lot of space. So you've got to make sure that you consider that when you're growing that plant. This is probably one of the bigger plants that most home gardeners would grow. There's a couple other tall type plants, but this is a favorite of many. All right, this plant height key can be found at the bottom of the crop chart, and it's very important because you don't want to disallow sunlight to reach your plants. So you can see here, short is listed as under 12 inches. Those small, beets and that kind of thing. Next is medium, maybe your beans, 12 inches to 35 inches, and then tomatoes. Corn are some of those tall plants that are 36 inches or higher. So you want to make sure that you're taking that. That's a big part of this whole putting your plan together, is making sure that you're putting the right plant in the right space to get the sunlight that it needs. All right, you can see the corn on the background of this photo. Corn is considered a tall plant. That's probably not the end of the growing season. It's got a lot of space up there before it's fully mature. Corn's considered one of those. Can get up to 6 to 8 feet tall. Tomatoes, especially those indeterminate types, the same. They will keep on growing as long as they have the right conditions. So you have to make sure that you plan for that. That fence is likely on the north side of the yard, and that allows for sunlight from southern exposure to reach this garden. The area in the front, it has some small height plants, as you can see. And then next is some beans, probably some medium size, and then that tall corn in the back. All right, the planting dates. It's important to plant your seeds or transplants at the right time to avoid risk of damage from temperature extremes. The planting window column on the common crop chart is a good reference. The dates on this slide are specific to Corvallis. It sounds like 100% of you are from the Valley, and likely many of you are from Corvallis, so these would be appropriate. If you're from other regions, or those people that are, there is another, if you have friends that are, on page 8, there is something that has all the dates, average dates for the state of Oregon. Again, seed packets and seed catalogs also have information about planting dates, and these sources will often refer to the last and first frost dates. Seed packets and the common crop chart, they'll help you also tell you days until harvest, or the number of days from planting a seed or a transplant until that crop is ready for harvest. This helps you to plan around the first frost date. For example, let's say you're going to grow tomatoes. You need 80 days before they are ready to harvest. And that first average frost date is only 50 days away. That could be a problem. Your crop will not have enough time to mature before the frost hits, and likely you're not going to have those big, beautiful red tomatoes that you're probably going for. All right, next slide. How big should your garden be? That depends on your answers to these questions. Why are you gardening? Are you gardening just to feed yourself? Are you going to feed your family as well? Planning on feeding your community? I think a couple of you are planning on helping out in some community gardens. That's great. Will your garden also be a play space for your kids? Do you have young kids? That's a great opportunity to have them get involved and do what they can. May want to set up a little space off to the side so they're not, creating too much damage, but they could help you and have a good time, and maybe do some tasks that would keep them engaged and help you out. Next, how much time do you have to spend gardening? You need to be realistic about this. How much time do you really have? When the season starts out, many of you already know, it's not a whole lot of work. But as you get deeper into the season, you gotta, maintain that garden. You gotta water that garden. You gotta harvest, and everything gets big, and the sun's coming down hard, and you need to make sure that you are realistic about that. All right. Next, how much room do you have? I'm sorry. Let's see. Yeah, having access to a large area, for one, doesn't mean that you need to grow a large garden. Remember, a small weed-free garden produces more and will give you more pleasure than a large weedy mess. Start small. You can always increase the size of your garden the following year, but start small and you'll be better off. All right, Rinda, do we have any questions at this point?
We do have a few questions. I want to offer a couple of clarifications for everyone, though. First, I put a link in for the common crop chart. For anybody who does not have their materials yet, you could get a chance to see what Frank was talking about. And so you could click on that link, and that can get you to it. It's hard for me to talk. And then the other thing is, there was a question in there that was already answered about community gardens and a list. And in your resource guide, when you get those materials, that information is in there, and contact information is in there too. And so I believe Judith answered that. So thank you for that. Yes, Frank, the first question that I think I could present to you is on the chart and the dates there. Is that from seed or from transplant?
Okay, well, let's go back to the chart if we can, and I can show that. But basically, there's a column that right here has got transplants. There are some direct seed. I know this doesn't have it. Basically, it's from when it gets in the ground, and those seed packet might have more details on that. But does anyone else have any?
Yeah, it is.
Runners have any input on that?
Go ahead, Leah.
Oh, I was going to say it's a great question because seed packets don't always explain that really well. But a lot of the plants that you do direct seed, like your beets or lettuce, will give you days from seed that you put in the ground, like Frank says. But then things that you usually put in the ground as a plant because they need warmer growing conditions as a seed, like tomatoes and eggplants and peppers, they'll give you the day from transplanting. So it's not consistent across the different varieties.
I think the most useful thing to remind you is just a relative number of days. It's not going to be exact for anything, but like Frank was giving examples of tomatoes. Some tomatoes will say 60 days, that typically is those little cherry tomatoes. And some will say 90 days, and those are usually those big heirloom ones. So it might not be exactly 60 or exactly 90, but it just gives you an idea of how long and which ones will mature more quickly than others.
Thank
Okay.
you.
The next question. It was kind of addressed in the chats with some other people responding, but just to clarify, basil, what is the best time to put it outside? We saw responses when the weather is warmer. Is there a certain temperature?
Well, yeah, soil temperature does matter. And, there are some things that you can do, if you've got a raised bed, it'll usually be a little warmer than in the ground. Where is it placed? But yeah, I think around 50 degrees is about right for that, for soil. And, but yeah, again, I encourage you to put those starts in if you're going to start putting them in March instead of the seeds, direct seeding.
Okay. Thank you. I think there are some questions in there, and then they're getting some responses back to them already. So we will address container gardening in just a little bit. There was a question about starting peas. Think we could already start them now. You should have heard our conversation at the very beginning. So do you want to respond to that? Oh,
yes,
it looks like Lynn just did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great time to grow peas. I know this chart here that you can see, it's kind of cut off, but the actual page does have peas listed, and now is a great time for peas, absolutely. Yeah, direct seeding them is the way to go. And some we were talking about earlier as well. I mean, some people will soak the seeds, but really around here, it's pretty wet. The ground has been pretty wet. And if you put them in the ground when it's wet, usually you'll be okay. It'll take a while. Sometimes it takes, a couple weeks for them to come up, and just try to be patient, but absolutely. I've been growing peas, and there's some great cultivars for this area.
All right. Thank you for all your questions. We'll move on now to choosing a site.
All right. And for those of you, let's see here. All right. So as it says right up there at the top, your job as a gardener is to give plants what they need. So that sunlight, that air, the water, the nutrients, that is what your job is to do, is to provide those at the right time and in the right amounts. And in this course, you'll find out more about what those plants need, and so that you can have a successful garden. If you put the right ingredients in, you'll get the right, better chances of getting the right result. All right, next slide. All right, sunlight. Gardens need it, and we know that. Sunlight is the most important element in your garden, and selecting a garden site that gets sun all day long is ideal, but at a minimum, all vegetables need 6 hours. Some will grow with less than that, but they'll likely be weak and sick and probably not be optimum. So make sure you get that at least 6 hours. An open south-facing site is best, but if that's not available to you, just at least look for a shade-free place. If you've got any obstacles like trees, large shrubs that can block sunlight. You need to consider that and try to plant your garden away from those so they get that sun that they need. And last there, a gradual slope will help with drainage. So if you have something like that, that's good. All right, next slide. So this image shows an ideal placement and location for a vegetable raised bed. It's an open site. It's got southern exposure, shade free, and it's got a gradual slope. Remember that gardens, again, we mentioned that 6 hours of sun is what they need. If your patio or deck is south facing, you'll probably be able to grow almost anything. If your deck faces east or west, you'll get less sun. So you may have trouble with those peppers, tomatoes, eggplants that really love the sun. If you have a north-facing patio or anything that gets less than 6 hours of sunlight a day, you'll probably be limited to growing those greens, lettuce, and root crops that are okay with a little less sunlight and cooler areas. Remember that soil, plants, and water can get very heavy, so be sure that your patio deck can support that weight if that's where you've got them. If your garden is in the drip line of the roof, and that's basically where the water will drip off, it will be difficult to make sure it gets the right amount of water. So it's best that you get that away from the drip line, and that way it'll get the water it'll need. Because container gardens are often limited by space, grow things vertically to save space. This would work for peas if you plant them in containers, pole beans, cucumbers, really work well. Plant your tall and trellis crops like corn and tomatoes on the north side of the garden so that you do not shade shorter vegetables. You want to plant those shorter vegetables to the south side of your garden, just like here in this chart in that raised bed. And those shade tolerant plants, you should plant under those tall plants. All right, first, you need to get to know your soil. You'll receive more in-depth soil information next class, but for now, here are 3 suggestions. Drainage. Soil should be loose and well draining. When soil doesn't drain well, it stays wet late into the spring, and it really makes it hard to grow those early season vegetables. Standing water also not good. If your soil is heavy and stays wet long after rain stop, you can grow vegetables in raised beds instead. Yeah, raised beds will not only be better drained, they'll also warm earlier. So that's why those raised beds will help you with that, and as well as the drainage. Cheryl will talk more about raised beds here shortly. All right, next, weeds. I know that last bullet's probably like, what? Who would have thought that weeds are a good sign? But they show that your soil can support plant life. So the healthier the weeds or grass growing on the site, the better the soil will be for vegetables. All right, a couple other considerations to take into account are natural breeze and convenience. So where there's good airflow, you'll have a less of a chance of getting some of these diseases that come about when you've got stagnant, humid, warm type of air. That breeze helps prevent things like tomato blight, mildew on squash, or mold on green beans. So having a place with a natural breeze would make one of those contributors to a good garden location. Out of sight, out of mind. You want to make sure you're able to see or visit your garden every day. So make it convenient to plant, maintain, and harvest. Is it easy to get out there? Is it easy to get to your tools? Where is the hose? Right? Do I have a hose that's long enough to get where it needs to be? So make sure that you put that garden where it's easy to access, and you can access all those different tools and things that you will need to maintain your garden. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the problem spot here. These low areas at the base of a hill or at the foot of a slope that are bordered by a fence, Not a good area. Should avoid that. That cool air tends to settle in these areas. It can injure your plants, so not good. Areas near creeks, because the soil may be too wet and the garden could flood in heavy rains. You want to avoid those areas. I know we just said earlier that breeze is good, and it is, but extra windy areas, those areas that, you know, are very open, you might get a lot of wind and it could damage your plants, it, you know, stress them, and could be a problem for you. Next, soil along buildings or under gutters might contain lead paint. There's, you know, a lot of older homes here in the valley, and some of those have lead. It is toxic and sometimes can contaminate the soil. So if you have any knowledge of any other contaminants haven't been used in your proposed area, you know, you probably know what's been going on in your yard, what might have been there possibly, or what it was used for, what the area was for. Maybe worth testing the soil if you're not sure, to make sure that you're being safe about this. All right, this concludes the choosing your site topic. We will now watch a garden planning video that one of our master gardeners made. All right, please direct your attention. All right, now we're going to talk about making a planting map. Next slide. All right, so if you take a look here, first step you're going to do is draw a basic sketch of your space. So there on the left side of the screen, you can see a basic sketch of what you want to look for. Basically, you're looking for certain things like which way is the sun going to move across your yard, and the location of your water, right? Should also include the size of your space, the location of your water source, any existing fences, buildings, trees, or walkways that you'll need to work around, and your possible planting area. You can see there, this person chose where that blue comes from, right there by the water source, is where they're planning on putting theirs in. And the orientation of your garden to the sun. If you put the north, south, east, west on there, that will help identify which way it's going to come. Once you've decided which crops and varieties to plant, you can choose the list that you came up with to draw up a garden map that will show where you will plant those chosen crops of yours. If for some reason you don't currently have a garden space, as you are, well, for your homework, you're going to have to put this together, which we'll talk about here soon. But if you don't have a current garden space, you can plan for a 4-foot by 8-foot type bed, or an array of containers if that's what you are restricted to. All right, so the next step after you've put that sketch together on the left, you're going to create what is there on the right. You're going to use graph paper, and on page in your book that you'll receive, there's actual graph paper that you can use, and you'll draw an enlarged version of just your planting area, which is what you see there on the right side. In this example, 1 square foot is equal to 4 squares. In other words, 1 foot is equal to the length of 2 squares. So you can make 1 foot equal to the length of 1 square if you want to, as long as you're consistent. You know, if you go back and forth, it won't work out right. So whatever you choose. Usually if you use the 4 squares, you have more space and it'll be easier to see your plan. So I would recommend that. Next, you're going to want to mark the location of garden beds and paths. You can use 1 square on the graph paper to indicate 1 square foot in your bed for that if you wanted to, and indicate those cardinal directions on your map. All right, next slide. So once you've mapped out your planting area, you can start thinking about how to place those crops from that personal planting plan list of vegetables that you put together, and put them into your personal planting map, which is what's there on the right. You're going to use that rough sketch that you made earlier, that you will end up making, that you saw in that last slide on the left, and make sure you're planting those crops in those best locations. Once you've considered all those different things that can affect your vegetable area, then it's time to start putting things down. For example, you want to plant those sun-loving crops out of the shadow of buildings or trees, right? You want to make sure that they're going to get that sun that they need. Also, proper plant spacing might appear initially to be too far apart, but when your plants are still small, it won't be a problem. But once they start filling up that space, you don't want to have overcrowding. You'll prevent the air to flow, flowing through and that kind of thing. So, using that mature footprint and try to resist the urge to fill in every space. Like my wife tries to do sometimes is, hey, here's some space, let's put something in there. So you want to make sure you're careful with that. Proper plant spacing is important. So make sure you're looking at that. All right. This is just a quick example. What we gave you, ultimately, we want you to have the best plan for you. So it's a personal planning plan. The more you put into this, the better off you'll be. Once you consider all these different things, remember that job as a gardener, making sure that they're getting the right things at the right time, the proper amounts. Well, when you set the plan up and you do all the research, it'll help you get there. Here on this quick
Frank,
sketch.
Excuse me, Frank.
Yes,
we are running about 5 minutes slow, so
okay.
maybe we can skip these couple slides.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the homework slide. Okay, so don't get too worried. All right, you will receive some homework assignment, and this is it. There is a worksheet, basically. Well, I'm sorry, not a worksheet, a handout that has all the details step by step of how to complete the tasks. And basically, the first submission date for you all will be on. It says Tuesday there, but that's a misprint. 11 March is correct. Basically, your next class date, the next session, which is on Thursday, 11 of March at noon. We're requesting that you create that basic sketch that looks just like that on the right, and all the details in the handout for step 1 will give those directions. And then the next submission date will be next week, Monday, March 15th, the day before your third session at 3 p.m. And that will be that final planning map of just your planning area, which is outlined there. You'll send that in by email to me, and then we'll get the opportunity to talk about this in breakout rooms, breakout sessions, and get some feedback from us from that basic sketch, and then it'll help you. You'll have over the weekend to put that other one together. So thank you very much, and that concludes my portion of the brief.